mentor said, just help test the nerves and how they connect to the brain and making sure that none of them have been damaged.
Hold right there. Hold. Like your leg. Hold right there. Push forward against my hand. Okay, push backwards. I'm going to push to this side. Good. Good. I want you to stand up for me. We're going to check your balance, see how things are. You're going to stand over one leg.
And this is connected to the auditory part, just making sure her balance is good, and if it's not, then that'll mean that more of an auditory part of her brain was damaged.
Walk, heel, toe, looking straight ahead. Don't look at your feet.
Don't take a look until we get back.
Close your eyes. I'm going to snap. I want you to raise the hand over your mouth. Snap. Okay? Like if you're in your left, you raise the left hand. Okay? Okay, open your eyes. I want you to follow my finger to not move the head. Okay? Keep your eyes straight.
And this is also connected to the nerve responses and making sure that those are all still good.
Open them, look at me, on your finger. Close your eyes. Open. Okay. Good. What were the 3 words that I told you? Alright, you're going to close your eyes and tell me where on your body you feel like you poke. Okay? Open your eyes. You can open your eyes really big. Smile. Frown. Lips out to the crown. Okay. Here's our opening. Does that bother you? Okay. Does your headache stay the same or got worse as well? Okay. So we're going to hold you out for the play until you're symptom free for 48 hours. Nothing but Tylenol, no headphones, don't put your phone in the dark. Try to take you, nothing to exert yourself. No weight training, nothing to get your heart rate up. Okay. Once you are symptom free, we'll have you get impact test again, see what the results look like, just so you can look at having to function, see how you look. So go through it.
Alright, so at the end she talks about the impact test, and that is one thing that here at North Hall all athletes are normally required to take if they are in a contact sport, to make sure that if they are, it is a test that will give you like a baseline on like their brain function, and they'll have to go back and take that test after they get a head injury to make sure that by the time they whenever they get back to the their baseline score that they had on their test, then it would they'd be like liable to play or ready to play, like their brain is back to its proper function as it would need to be. And so the short-term problems, these are short-term problems that can arise from concussion. Some of the major severe ones are a coma or a seizure, and then the more or less severe short-term problems are dizziness, headaches, and blurred vision. And those are all based on the like auditory and different nerve impulses that can be damaged from a concussion. And then long-term problems that can arise from concussions. These are all, some of these can be very severe, and some of these can just not occur in a athlete if the severity of the concussion is not as bad as it could be. And so memory problems can arise, lack of inhibition or lack of like trying or wanting to do stuff, intense anger or aggression, personality changes, inattention and lack of concentration, problems organizing, planning, and problem solving, and that is from the cognitive functioning of the brain, and then language impairment. And that is why she had, in the video, she had the athlete make sure that she could move her mouth and frown and smile and stick her tongue out, just to make sure that that part wasn't as damaged, because if it had been, it could lead to something like a language impairment, her having to relearn how to move her mouth in certain ways to regain the function of speech. And so this is a return to play process that my mentor and I, who was in the video, this is the process that we worked together and came up with on how the player would need to return to play at the right in the right steps. And so the baseline, this is just like recognizing that the player had a concussion and that they need to be have 24 hours where there's no symptoms of the concussion occurring any longer. And then step one is light exercise. This is just mainly to get their heart rate higher than what it normally is during the day. And it can include like exercise, riding on an exercise bike, walking, or light jogging, but they do not need to be like doing full intense workouts like weightlifting or sprinting or stuff like that. It's just to raise their heart rate higher than it normally is. And then step two is moderate exercise, and this is just to get their like movement back, just to get them like stepping towards the right area on what they need to go. And that includes like moderate jogging, brief running, some easy intensity workouts, and moderate intensity weightlifting. And then so step three includes non-contact exercise, which is participating in their practice but not going full contact, like in football, not practicing hitting drills, but going through the motions, that's okay, but just not hitting so they re-injure themselves. And then step four is practice to reintegrate them into the full practice and get them back to their normal habits. And then step five is actually getting them back to playing like in games and stuff like that. And it's important to like monitor like what they're doing during the different steps to make sure that they don't like relapse back to symptoms. And it may be that you have to take longer on steps 1 and 2 and 3 before you can get to normal practice and normal playing. But you need to follow the steps so that the players don't either get a concussion, another concussion before it's too early, or they could just injure themselves in a different way if they're not like fully, if their brain is not the full like capabilities that it normally is. And right here you can download the file that we have came up with. We have it inside the training room to give to different coaches and players or parents if they request it. And then here are some interviews that I did with my mentor, and then also the student athlete that I mentored, who was a football player. And these are just some basic questions that I had thought of to ask them. And so like, what is a concussion? What sports do you believe have, or what sport do you believe has the most concussions? And just basic information on them. And she defined a concussion as a mild traumatic brain injury, or MTBI, and it's more of like a functional injury than a structural. So you can't really see like what happens to them, but you can like see the what it affects. Like you can see how they are dizzy. You can see how their vision is impaired. You can see how they can't really hear right, or they're not thinking clearly. And so that is what she described as a concussion as. And then there's other things like what are some ways that concussions could be prevented. And I have more that I worked on, and I'll pull it up in a second, that shows like ways that I have, like after watching different sports and seeing concussions occur in those sports, and ways that I view, or ways that I think concussions could be prevented in those sports. And then the student athlete, this is the student athlete interview, and these are just different ways that they thought that they had prevented either a concussion or a way that they thought they could have if they had already had a concussion. And then just their take on like what they think about concussions, and if there should be rules and regulations on the different sports, and reducing the number of concussions as a whole. And so here is what I've been working on throughout the year, watching the different sports, and these are just different ways that I thought concussions could be prevented. And so I picked football, soccer, and basketball because those were the main contact sports that I watched and where concussions occurred. And then throughout the year we had to do annotated bibliographies, and my annotated bibliographies are down here below, and the articles with which they are associated with. And then also my blog, there's a link to the blog that we have had to post on throughout the year about our mentorship and the dynamics of our mentorship and our goals of how to get to the like be what we want to do and stuff like that. So there are links here for the articles and my mentorship blog. And then to go back to the first essential question, what is a concussion? I believe it's anything that occurs like to the brain where there's a rocking motion inside the skull, and it creates a damage to the brain, whether it be a bruise or something of that nature that impairs one of the main functions of the brain, whether it be the nervous system, the auditory response, optical response, and cognitive thinking and things of that nature. And they and how they affect the people that suffer them from the different sports they play. And it's not only affects like the different sports, but it also affects the players differently, like the types of players they are, the types of their like life, how they lived before. Like if they were straight A students, it could affect them more than it could affect another player, just because of the way that they occur to or the ways that the brain is affected by it. And that is my presentation on